everyone, welcome back to Manufacturing Hub. It is Wednesday at your normally scheduled time. Super excited to be back on talking with everyone. We've got Alicia on this week. Super happy to go get into her experiences and all of that. But no, if you guys are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you guys are new or you're not normally involved in chat, we love to have a lively conversation. Our top two platforms that we're streaming on are on LinkedIn as well as YouTube. So if you guys are on any of those platforms, feel free to say hi. Feel free to tell us where you're at, where you're watching us from. Today, if you've got questions, I imagine mostly for Alicia, but also if you've got questions for Vlad and I about other things, including Class T fuses, which is Vlad's current most favorite topic of Wednesday afternoon, then please go ahead and drop those questions in the comments. We will do our very best to go and ask Alicia those questions as we get in. But without further ado, everyone officially welcome to Manufacturing Hub. This is episode 186. My name is Dave. This guy up here is Vlad, and we'd like to officially welcome Alicia Lomas on Manufacturing Hub. Alicia, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, very excited to chat with you guys today.
Thank you so much for taking the time, Alicia. I think it's going to be a great conversation. Before we dive into all of those topics, could you give us a bit of a background? What was your career or early career in manufacturing like? What was your, I guess, different transitions? And ultimately, what are you doing today?
Sure. Yeah, so I studied chemical engineering and got into food and bev right out of school. Did production supervisor for a little bit at a cheese company, but then wanted to get into engineering. Of course, it was like my gateway. And some engineers at Daisy Brand saw my potential and decided to kind of take me under their wing. And uniquely at Daisy, they did everything in-house, and it was the process engineers that were really the controls engineers, but also the process engineers. So, under these guys, I was able to learn sanitary piping, control panel design, PLC programming. We were on Wonderware. We were on, Control Logic, Sense Mold Slicks, and on ControlNet. And they basically taught me everything from scratch and then gave me the cottage cheese project, which was a new product for them. And I'm 22, 23 years old, and they kind of let me run with that. But we're there to fill in the gaps and make sure I knew how to use my multimeter and all those, basic things that you have no idea. You just know in a book what a valve is, and then you go out in the field and realize what a valve actually is and all the nuances with it. So that kind of built that foundation for me of wanting to do controls, of course, but also beyond that, I care about everything that's happening in the factory and how it impacts ops. And so kind of jumped around for various reasons. I had a niece born, wanted to move back to Seattle, and worked at a couple other food and bev companies, sausage and beef jerky company, Oberto, and then Continental Mills. They make pancake mixes, Ghirardelli brownie mixes, and was basically like the only engineer on the site. So I would be in charge of all of the capital projects. So got to do some really boring stuff like install roofs and boilers and things, but got to do really cool things like new packaging lines, new shortening production systems, that sort of thing, data collection upgrades. But still always wanted to go back more to controls. When I was in those roles, I would always be helping maintenance, or when there were complex problems or trying to get a production line to rate, I would jump in the PLCs, but I had a whole bunch of other hats to wear. So, did systems integration for like a year. I wasn't necessarily set up the best in that situation, so didn't love it and missed being in a plant. So ultimately ended up at Chobani Yogurt, which was a large greenfield build in Twin Falls, Idaho. And that's actually the time where I made the transition. I had a VP of engineering be like, hey, you should lead the team. And I'm like, ooh, I don't know. I really liked just being the best controls engineer. I was very competitive, like who can solve the problem the fastest. And I made the jump and actually really enjoyed it. It was definitely painful for a while. Had to learn a lot of lessons, but really started to love mentoring and, growing people and letting people excel. But I always dabbled. No matter what, I'm a hands-on leader, and I'm always going to get in the code. I'm going to be on the on-call rotation. That's just who I am. So at basically when I was at Chobani, it was kind of interesting. We were able to actually get the systems integrator that did all of the plant design and controls off site, because our team had to like clean up a lot after them. They had flip flop timers that were not actually a second when we were doing like totalization of milk, and we found a lot of issues in the code and had to rewrite a lot of it and kind of built a team so that we could do projects ourselves, and which was always unique. So that's kind of become my thing, is like owning everything, having a controls team in house, which I know not every company can do, but I've been fortunate enough to land at a few places that allow me to do that. So more recently, I was at Redwood Materials, and we were doing battery recycling and lithium ion battery recycling and then battery material manufacturing. I was the first controls person hired by the founder, and then built my team to 30 people. And we built 4 factories in the last 3.5 years, which was pretty crazy. And that was, based on the controls design that I implemented. And that was very, very satisfying, gave me more exposure to the startup world. And I was, growing that level of a team was something new for me as well. It's like now you have managers working under you, which is a whole nother animal versus just having engineers. And more recently, I went to another startup. So I'm at Terraform Industries, and really early stage pre-Series A funding, where we are taking solar and we're building an electrolyzer, and we're using that to make hydrogen. And then we're doing direct air capture for CO2, and then using a reactor to make methane, and in the future, other hydrocarbons. And so doing green methane, green hydrogen, all of that, trying to help the climate, and, really getting into this renewable energy space. So yeah, that's been it in a nutshell.
I've got I guess a couple of questions, but historically, right? I think the background in chemical and process engineering makes a lot of sense, especially for what you're doing today. But I'm curious, and because I get this question often from, mechanical engineers, process engineers that are looking maybe to make the switch into controls. Was that a natural switch that you pushed for, or they sort of allowed you to be more hands-on? Because I know that many, again, like other industries or other like engineers don't have the opportunity to work with controls, and you know what I mean. To some extent it's unfortunate. So how would you say they could find those opportunities, unless they're given to them, right?
Yeah, you kind of do have to have them given to you. And that's the unfortunate part. And I think, we need to continue to figure out how to allow more people to make that switch. So, I just happen to work for people that did controls along with all the process engineering, and they gave me that opportunity, and that's where I figured out I love this. But
Mhm.
like at Redwood, I actually brought over a couple of different people that were on that may have been like industrial engineers or doing things more on the ops team, but they had a passion to come in and learn ignition and build MES stuff. And so I actually have tried to allow people to have that opportunity, whether it's just 20% of the time they come shadow our people, we give them some assignments. I've done that with interns at Chobani too, or like maintenance techs that transition to PLC techs. So I think I would bring in like PLC training for the maintenance techs, and then ultimately certain people would then get promoted into my department to be PLC techs. So I think it comes back to us, like as the technical leaders, that have to allow that. But everybody's going to want to go to controls if you ask. I mean, everybody, in my experience, all of the maintenance guys, even a lot of the mechanical engineers, like, oh, I want to do controls, I want to program robots. So you have to kind of figure out what that looks like and what that path looks like, without just saying, okay, open the doors, everybody can come over and learn controls.
Yeah, and it's an interesting. To be honest with you, I don't have the answer as to who is the best positioned like discipline, right? Is it someone who understands process well and then goes into controls, or is it obviously getting someone who's already done controls and can fulfill that role, so to speak, hitting the floor, running? But to be honest with you, I think like for me, the hardest part to teach was always like process safety and sort of the understanding of the manufacturing space rather than like controls. I think people can pick up sort of programming given enough time, but having a good sense of like manufacturing best practices has always been a bigger challenge, at least with the people that I've work with. So
I agree with that. And I've definitely run into controls engineers that didn't seem to want to care about the process or care about what's going on. It's very much like transactional. You need to give me a control narrative and I'm going to program it, and then if it doesn't work right, that's because you told me the wrong thing. And I won't hire anybody like that. Let that be known. You have to care about the process. You have to leave your desk. You have to go talk to the operators. It's so important. And so I think I had a pretty interesting mix of employees at Redwood. It was like third of electrical, mechanical, and chemical. And so I think each one of those disciplines can really add value because we do have to touch all of those things. And I'm not going to sit here and say chemical engineering is the best, but I might be a little biased.
let me ask you like one more question before I pass it over to Dave. I'm curious about that whole transition into management, right? You mentioned that there was an opportunity for my VP at Chobani. Maybe what was that like dynamic like? And I know that many larger companies have sort of like two tracks, right? Like the managerial track, or you can become a very kind of like technical SME. Were there like discussions there? How did you, I guess, have that conversation and maybe some hindsight, how to say it, like retrospective on like going that route at that point?
Challenging in that I did have that VP who had an automation background, but he was in the New York plant, so we didn't get a lot of time together. So I do feel a little bit like I was left on my own. And now you're taking somebody that I understand the factory, I understand the control system, but now I have to figure out how to understand people. And one of the biggest mistakes that I made early on was like trying to morph everybody into me, which was, like you need to be this level of a programmer or this level of a project manager. And then I find out, well, that not everybody ticks that way. And you're going to meet controls people that are incredible at the hardware side and the electrical side, but maybe they're not the greatest ladder programmers or programmers in general, or maybe they're not going to necessarily want to go into scripting and ignition to do more of the advanced features. So you have to really get to know your people and understand what track they want to go on to, and then what areas that they excel in, so that you can have a good experience for them and yourself, and make sure you're utilizing your people effectively. So that was one of my biggest things, was like, how do I figure out where people's strengths are, and then where are their development points as well? And it doesn't always mean that you have to develop them up to a certain level of programming. Maybe you just keep them on projects where they only have to get into the code after somebody already wrote it, and that's totally fine. There's so many things to do in controls that you don't have to have everybody wear all the hats. Although I think it's very important not to pigeonhole people. And I definitely do not agree with, I'm a SCADA programmer, I'm a PLC programmer, now for advanced MES stuff, yeah, you might need to really dedicate. But like if you've never touched the PLC, that's a mistake, right? So I think it's really important for people's growth to be able to wear all those hats and at least have exposure to all those things.
Interesting. Let me go ahead and jump in and take this opportunity, Alicia. Otherwise, Vlad and you will be having a very two-sided as opposed to a three-sided conversation, because I can see that all of us have a bunch of questions for you. I guess we've got a bunch of topics to get into, but I have one really kind of interesting question that I feel like we talk about a lot here on Manufacturing Hub, but we also talk a lot about with people looking to go bring either new folks into industry or looking to upskill. And you talked about it a lot with Redwoods, and when you were with Chobani and with all of these other groups of bringing in people and upskilling them. And I guess the easy part of the question is, what do you look for when you're looking and having conversations with people to see if they are going to be successful? You talked about a bunch of different backgrounds. Are there any like key points, key indicators that you look for, or key topics that you hope to find in people to know if it's worth spending the time going through the upskilling process and everything along those lines?
Yeah, a lot of it obviously is attitude and
Yep.
just emotional intelligence. That goes for really any employee, I think. But from a technical perspective, I had people tell me when I went Siemens at one of my factories, I had people tell me that you can't find Siemens developers in the US. You can only find Rockwell ones. So you must go Rockwell. And I proved them wrong. Because what you're looking for is people that have had exposure to various platforms. What I think is hard is if you take somebody that's only done Rockwell and they've only touched a PowerFlex 525 and they've never had to interface with a Modicon, or they've never had to do a Yaskawa VFD, or I need a little bit of that variety to show that they can go outside of the box and not just continue to do the same things that they were taught in that one environment.
Mm-hmm.
And then and that they must be curious about it and, excited about learning new things, because that's our world. And so I'm really just looking for that drive, that openness. I want people to, if people are trying to act like they know things and then they're saying wrong things and they're acting in confidence, that's a big red flag. I need people that are humble and they know there's a lot that they don't know. And I expect them to come into a place like Redwood and be kind of overwhelmed, but like excited to learn these 7 different PLCs we have on site and these 6 different models of VFDs, and I need that eagerness. And then I will help you and we will get you there. I often use a mentoring / skills matrix where you pair people up and then you're evaluating what level are you at with FANUC programming, what level are you at with TIA, and then that's your check-in point. Like, how are you doing? Do you have a project where you actually can learn this? And then you can pair them up with people that are very skilled at it, so people are continuing to grow, versus that pigeonholing thing where I'm like, oh, he's my TIA guy. If I have problems, I always go to him. Now that happens sometimes, but try to not make that the thing.
Absolutely. No, I think that's good. And I think it brings up a bunch of topics that we want to go chat about, building the technical teams, talking about different control systems. But before we get into that, I want to talk about your experiences. So you've worked for a bunch of very large companies. And the last couple of positions and roles you've been in have been more startups. Can you tell us maybe a little bit about the experiences between the two? I'm sure both of them have the positives and probably also some detractors. But can you share a little bit of your experience of the large companies versus kind of the smaller startups, or maybe huge startups?
Yeah, I'll say that most of the companies I worked for, with the exception of Walmart, were privately held companies. So they
Okay.
were not the behemoths. And so I don't necessarily have the experience of the very, very large public company. And there are some similarities between these private companies, family owned, everybody kind of knows each other, and the startup style. But what I will say is, startups are exciting because you are just going really fast. You're doing brand new stuff every day, but it can be quite intimidating. And I think that the reason why I was able to be as successful as I have been at the startups is because I worked at a lot of different companies and saw a
Okay.
lot of different plants. So luckily I didn't deal with a lot of red tape, but I still had to do capital requests. Every time you were going to go do a big project, you had to do a lot of paperwork, a lot of justification, and that's different. Startups, it's like, we got to go. We just got to go do this thing, which is fun and exciting. But the planning side of getting the capital request, make sure you're actually going to get an ROI on whatever you're doing, I think is really important. So, I think, and then startups get to a point where they need to mature and start thinking about those things. So I think just being able to start on this more established company, see how businesses are run, see how manufacturing is run, has really helped me. I'm the subject matter expert on what, lots and SKUs and license plates and all these things are when you get into like manufacturing execution systems. I would have never known all of that had I not been on all of these other, dairies and
Hmm.
manufacturing plants, to understand how the world does it. And I was in ones that didn't have any networked equipment, no data collection. I had to like hook up, a paid RS Links license and do DDE transfers to Excel to get downtime tracking and, those sorts of things. And then at Chobani, it was all very networked. Everything was Ethernet. There was not anything there wasn't even a micrologics in the plant. Everything was compact or control logics, and it was all beautiful. But I saw all of those different things, and then
Hmm.
it allowed me to go into startups and be like, I can be scrappy. Give me whatever PLC, whatever VFD, I'll make it work. As long as it has the right communication protocol. Where you got to educate people on that. But yeah. So I mean, I think there's pluses and minuses in both, and it kind of depends on what you want and where you're at in your career.
I would say, and this is like a slight side note, Chobani has a very interesting history, and I'm assuming Alicia, you know it because the founder, I think, acquired like a shutdown Yoplait plant, from what I
Yep.
remember, in like 2013, and like revamped it with the process for that Greek style yogurt. So
Yep.
super interesting. Like even from a business standpoint, how much of a, I guess, a failure that plan was, and then got revamped with not, I guess, that revolutionary of a new formula, still yogurt, but
Yep.
just introducing a new product was, I guess, like a huge. I don't know I don't know what it's worth now, but it's massive, right? It's billions of dollars that they've been able
Yep.
to make. So.
Yeah, that plant too was like a maze. They had to get really creative with their layouts. I've visited the upstate New York plant, and we were spoiled at Twin Falls because we built everything knowing we were going to expand and we were going to continue to build production lines, but they had to make it work. So you're like going around corners to get to the fruit filling station, and it didn't flow well. I mean, they had a bunch of engineering challenges because of it, but they made it work.
Mhm. Let me ask you, I guess, a tougher question for the smaller companies, right? I've rarely been in positions where, and I think a lot of engineers are rarely placed in positions where you can decide, on the platform that you want to go with. How did those conversations go, right? Besides just like hiring people, like the budgets, like long-term suppliers, like what did those conversations maybe look like for you?
was it was interesting because one of the first things was, hey, Siemens or Rockwell, they hired a PLC person. What do you want to go with? And naturally, I should, you would have thought I would say Rockwell because I can program in a Rockwell PLC like nobody's business, right? And that's what I'd done for 15 plus years. But, I basically I knew every dollar counted, and I knew that this decision was really important. So, I just kind of stepped back and looked at things as non-biasedly as possible and did an evaluation like technical capability, cost, lead time, because this was during global supply chain issues, all of these things, usability. And I'll tell you, Rockwell only won on usability, and everything else, Siemens hardware software is half the cost. Lead times are slightly better. I mean, these two are like neck and neck, but at the time I could get it a little bit faster. And then support was a big one. Siemens support, all you have to do is find a PLC on the side of the road and you can call in and get support. You don't have to have a tech connect or something. So,
Mhm.
I think I just tried to be as non-biased as possible. My first hire was actually somebody that worked for me at Chobani, and he was mad. He was like, Siemens, oh, how dare you? Why did you do this to me? And now he loves Siemens. And we had this running tally of Rockwell versus Siemens because we still had Rockwell too.
Mhm.
And so it was in ignition. We'd have a +1 Rockwell, -1 Siemens. We had buttons and we would like keep track. And it was always fun to just trash talk both of them because I love them and I hate them both. But I have become a Siemens fangirl. I'm just gonna throw it all out there and say that. But I still get very excited to go program in a Rockwell PLC. So
Have you looked at other brands besides like Siemens or Rockwell, or were they just not, I guess, like at that same level as the big two?
not at the same level. I mean, when I was at Walmart, they definitely had plants that had like Schneider Electric PLCs or lots of Modicon and all that. But I just think from a known perspective, a proven platform,
Mhm.
these are just the go-tos. I don't know, it'd be challenging to go away from those in my opinion. It'll work, but if you're doing a large system, I think I'd be really nervous.
Yeah, I think that's the key for me also, right? Because I get that question every now and then, and obviously the short answer is it depends. But the reality is, I think you can't just look at the PLCs and HMIs because I think all of them have that. But then you have to look at the servo drives, the VFDs, the like IO cards, and yes, there's gonna be some similarities to some extent. You can always cross-platform integrate, but it becomes a challenge, right? And so it's not as, I think, like straightforward of an answer, and it's not like a pure cost optimization, because you mentioned obviously cost is of the essence for a smaller company, but that doesn't mean you go and the example I always use, like you can technically automate the whole facility on an Arduino, right? If you really like, that's the only parameter. But that's just the startup cost is going to be super low, then the cost
Mhm.
over the years is going to increase. So it's not an easy question to answer, and it's awesome that you've been through that opportunity. Like I said, I think very few engineers get to pick the platform and sort of evaluate and maybe build those first relationships even with the vendors. But
Yeah,
it's
and I think when it comes to just feeling like you're not going to get support if you did go with another brand, I have experiences with like, large companies, Schneider or ABB,
Mhm.
where
um,
you're trying to get something to communicate over Profinet or whatever, and there's a setting deep down in the depths of it that you have to adjust to be able to send it a signal, and I would never know from the documentation, and then you have to get somebody on the phone, hope they call back, because you didn't set up a support system with them where you have to get called back in a timely fashion. So, I mean, I've needed that support, and I guess I just don't have warm fuzzies that they have the infrastructure to support me like Siemens and Rockwell.
yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
If I can jump in. So, Alicia, can you give maybe everyone a little bit better idea of what this decision looked like? I know you said you're the first PLC person, but did you come in as a controls engineer? Did you come in as kind of management within that, with the goal to build a team? What was the thought process behind, do I stay with Rockwell, the tool, the solution and hardware I've used for 15 plus years, or do I go to this other tool? Can you take us through that in perhaps a little bit more detail?
Yeah, so I was hired as a controls engineering manager. So
Hmm.
it was meant to build a team, but for 3 to 6 months, I would be on my own doing everything by myself.
Hmm.
And it was interesting because there was a systems integrator on site a week before I started. And then I showed up, and then never again. Like, we're not allowed to hire systems integrators because we're going to own everything. That's
Okay.
just the culture, that's the desire. So, you know, things were a bit crazy, but I made it happen. Lots of hours. Um, anyway, so there was already some infrastructure there. So there were some used pieces of equipment that were used for recycling, and a lot of it already had Siemens because it came from overseas. So that definitely had something to do with, hey, probably forced my hand a little bit more to say, hey, let's look at Siemens.
Hmm.
So that was definitely part of it. And then it was just the evaluation, like I said. But I knew what the roadmap was. I knew we were going to be building tons of control panels, all of these new production
Hmm.
lines, new plants, all of that. So I knew my decision had to be able to be scaled, and it was a very important one. I'm not sure that I hit all your points, but you can keep asking me questions.
No, no, no. Absolutely. I think that definitely gives us a bit more of an overview. So thank you for that. I guess I want to talk a little bit about the hiring people, because I think you said that someone said that's going to be super difficult. Can you kind of share your experience of hiring people, either with Siemens experience here in the States? I think you were in California for the facility. So can you share your experiences with hiring people who either had Siemens experience, or upskilling people who didn't have Siemens experience?
Yeah, so I hired a couple of people to start out.
Mhm.
Actually, probably my first five, four
Mhm.
or five didn't have Siemens experience. So, I had learned Siemens, flat, really quickly and just had to make it work. And I had some of that existing code. So I was just like upgrading it and using some of that to kind of get me started. So that was a little bit easier. But we quickly transitioned into needing to build all of our own function blocks and, everything from scratch because we were about to embark on a design of a whole hydrometallurgy plant. So I hired people, and we just kind of trial by fire, and everybody just kind of started learning at the same pace, and then eventually I was able to find a couple of Siemens people,
Okay.
and so then that really helped us. And these same people also were like gurus in Ignition. I'd been using it for years, but I'd never touched Perspective, and
Mhm.
so they helped me make the decision. I was really hesitant and nervous to switch to Perspective, but that all went hand in hand. You're
Okay.
developing your templates, all of your UDTs, and then you're developing your function blocks. This is the standard for our plant. And so and then I continued to hire diverse groups of people. So there were only a few people out of the 30 that were local. So I
Okay.
was hiring people from all over, including other countries. So I eventually had somebody come from Nigeria that had really good Siemens experience. He, in fact, worked at Siemens and he had worked at Schneider Electric. And so I think the key for me was to widen my search and find people that were excited about the mission and excited to work with all of the different systems that we get to work with. Our job was very exciting. And then bring that largely diverse group of people together. And now you've got all of these people with diverse skills and a really collaborative team, and everybody's learning from each other. And I had mentioned before, like the mentorship program. So I'd always make sure there's a senior engineer with an on-level engineer or an associate engineer to help them grow. But I didn't have that much of a problem
Hmm.
finding people that had never done Siemens wanting to work on Siemens. They were very excited about it. And then I found that people picked those things up really quick. I did have one guy that I really wanted to hire, but he was a Beckhoff guy. And he ended up not coming because I was like, we're not doing Beckhoff yet. I'm not saying we won't, but that one hurt.
It's interesting that you had to scout so far for people. To be honest with you, I mean I know that there's a shortage of controls engineers, but to hire like completely overseas is I guess a difficult position to be in, right? It's interesting.
It's cool when companies actually support that because you are
Mhm.
going to get your best diversity that way. I think it benefit us a lot. And I was in Nevada actually, and until Tesla came, until Google, all of the things came, it was people that worked on slot machines. You didn't have that. You didn't have that infrastructure for technical people, and a lot of people ended up coming for Tesla.
Mhm.
And so then you've got people bouncing from Tesla to Panasonic to Redwood. It's like this whole game. Oh, we just raised our rates, so I'm going to go jump again. But it was required for us to build a controls team to recruit outside of our state. It just was necessary.
Huh, that is super interesting. The other question I wanted to ask you about this whole, well, I guess like Beckhoff's situation, but tangential to that, right? So I think again, going back to control systems, I think that there's more and more sort of this blend. I don't want to say like IT and OT is converging, but there's more, I want to say, non-ladder logic programming capability and more kind of PC driven software, PLCs, soft PLCs, whatever you want to call it. Like, what are your general like thoughts? I know that you guys have standardized on Siemens, but I'm assuming you've also evaluated those options and maybe are positive about them, negative about them. Just curious to hear your ideas about the controls on that side.
Actually, but very nervously went with an IPC at one point because of lead times. Like it was literally the only thing I was going to be able to get. And so it
Mhm.
Okay.
forced my hand a little bit. And so I went in kind of like, I'm skeptical. I mean, let's see how many times this thing crashes and, what's this going to look like? And it actually was okay. We ended up having issues with getting it to talk to Kepware and then ultimately Siemens. There were some weird glitches with it, just, new development stuff. And so we ended up going back to just a traditional PLC at that point. But my thoughts are, yes, we need some of this advanced compute and we need the ability to do some of this cool stuff, but I don't necessarily think it needs to take over what the traditional PLC is doing. I still think there's so much benefit of having your traditional PLC do all of your hardware interface and all of your safety. And I think that's just because it's been, hardened and it's been made robust and, a lot of people are trained up in that. But then I think that's where edge devices and cloud computing come in. Now we can talk to all that stuff and do all the cool modeling and we can do all of the cool predictive maintenance and then just like talk back and forth and say, hey, I'm going to optimize your set points. But I don't think we need to bring the PCs to the ground just yet. And I'm hesitant on Beckhoff because I have interviewed a lot of people that have used it and they've told me, yeah, I have to reboot it like 3 or 4 times a week, and but
Hmm.
then I have people that are obsessed with Beckhoff, so I don't know which one's true. Like, is Beckhoff really reliable and amazing? And I mean, I don't know. I don't know where we're at in the development cycle. So with all these things, I'm ready to adopt whatever is going to help us solve problems. But to just say this is the new fancy technology, we're going to go put in this fancy PC and PCs are better than PLC, I think that's wrong. I think you have to approach everything with a problem statement. And if the PLC can't do it and you need something else, let's talk about it. I'm not going to be, I'm open-minded.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I guess I share a similar opinion, right? My belief is that I think we went through an era where everything was very locked in, right? Everything was very proprietary. And so now I think we're seeing every vendor release this like open standard, right? So you can technically do anything on your PLC, but I think with that there's some danger where just because you can do everything doesn't mean you should do anything, right? And so
Yep.
I think like an IPC is great, but just because you can program, a batch recipe management system or even, a personnel scheduler on it doesn't mean you should be putting it on the PLC, which is meant to be controlling process first and foremost. So now you're starting to run in these like very gray areas, right? Where before PLCs could only do PLC tasks, but now they can kind of do whatever. So depending on which group is entrusted, I guess, with that power, it can yield different results. At least that's what I'm seeing. I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know if we're going to go back to like a very reserved model, but it's going to be interesting to see how things
It,
play out.
it's an interesting time frame right now with just all the advancements and digital
Mhm.
transformation and all the sexy, cloud stuff. I mean, we I mean, I think all of us want to do more, and I've been dreaming of the day when I could work on predictive maintenance, and I've been always collecting that data because one day I'm going to get somebody to build me a model so that I can actually like do work orders based on that. But
Mhm.
we're unfortunately often busy making the plant run, installing new lines, optimizing at the plant level. But I'm excited that we're getting more motion towards some of that more advanced stuff that I think is just going to benefit these manufacturing plants a lot. But we got to get away from all the buzzwords and the us versus them and all of these
Mhm.
things. That's where I think we're having problems right now. It's like, no, this is better, and we're like, no, we've been doing it over here like this, and it's fine. And let's just talk together and come up with what that right architecture looks like and what we're trying to solve.
Absolutely. I can certainly appreciate that. I also I believe that, a lot of the buzzwords are so gray that it becomes ambiguous, right? And I think language is very important. So when you talk to different people and they have a different understanding of what that buzzword is, then you're just not on the same page. So I certainly agree with what you're saying. Dave, thoughts, comments?
Absolutely no. So I would agree. And Alicia, I would say that lots of the people who are our guests, absolutely you included, and lots of our listeners are absolutely, technologists or tech enthusiasts, or let me go look at all of these fun things, such as everything Vlad has on his wall and surrounding all around him, hardware, software, all alike. And you can, to your point, you can go build a solution on a PLC that's been working for the last 50 years or 50 plus years in some cases, very similar PLCs, or you can go build it with a soft PC or soft PLC, right? You can go everything from the most hardened hardware to the most fluid software. When you are looking at new solutions, how do you go about kind of looking towards building to the future with potentially new technologies, but also making sure that you stay grounded enough in the it needs to work now, today, and for the next some number of years into the future. It needs to continue to work, and we can only take so much additional hedging of our bets, and we can only spend so much additional time and money on maybe not yet fully proven technologies.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it goes back to that question of, did you look at anything outside of Siemens and Rockwell? And so I think it's very important for your base control layer that's talking to the hardware to be something that's proven, something
Mhm.
that we know. And then you need to make sure whatever hardware you're buying is able to connect somehow, some way. And then what is your architecture and what is your communication protocol? So let's say I want my Profinet network to manage my drives, my IO, all of that, and maybe PLC to PLC comms, whatever. but then I might already be thinking about, if I have remote sites, I need to be thinking about MQTT and make sure that, do I have a plan, and where will I tie this in? What server do I need? So to me, it comes down to, don't put yourself in a position where you're going to have to completely rip it out and buy new stuff to do future. And the day one, when I install Ignition, I'm getting everything into Historian. That's just my default. And nobody cares at first. They're like, oh yeah, you got data, cool. And then 3 months later, they're like, I need this data. I need this for my air permit, or I need this to see what happened on this recipe. And you're like, I have that data. Let me do something with it. So, I think I naturally think that way because of my history and kind of what I've seen in factories, is to just make sure you're architecting with the future in mind, and maybe even choosing to buy something cheaper, but knowing that you can buy an add-on card, or whatever that looks like. So the data is so, so important, and it takes a while for the organization to catch up and realize they need it. And so I try to always anticipate that and get as much as possible. Because at Chobani, I mean, we were the data source, and then we had a developer that was like a guru with databases. He would take our data and then talk to the finance team and figure out what they needed, and architect that MES, ERP layers of all the reporting data that's necessary. But it all starts with us, in my opinion.
Mm. And I would say, if I may add to that, Alicia, I think I've seen too many maybe groups try to maybe go too fast and too quickly, instead of, building out, I guess, a journey, if you want to call it that, and look at, let's say, again, in some of the conversations on, the industrial automation social media, you'd see people benchmark against Tesla, right? And if you're a manufacturer that still has equipment from the 70s, the 80s, it's great to spend time on the architecture, but I think you cannot just in one fell swoop go from, where you are today to, hey, everything's connected, everything's collecting data, we've got MQTT set up and all that great stuff. I think it's also important to recognize sort of like where you stand, and not compare yourself to the, like greenfield facilities that have been deployed 5 years ago. I've seen too many groups also get stuck in that, we're gonna find the perfect architecture, and they never get going, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's super true. And I think I posted this on LinkedIn a while ago. When I was at Chobani, we had Microsoft come in, and they're like, we're going to do all this really cool stuff for you. We're going to bring in all these sensors, and then we're going to do all this data. And nobody in those meetings could talk about what we needed, what we weren't already doing on the control side and the reporting side. I don't know. It was very, very interesting. And unless you can define what data you're trying to get and how you would actually collect it on the plant floor, even with a pen and paper, you're not ready. So, and then it's really important to also understand what data is already available. So yeah, maybe you're not networked. Maybe you have a data highway plus line, but it's pretty easy to then get a data protocol converter, get that up to your historian, or whatever that looks like. And it is a journey, it is a roadmap that gets you there, and it's incremental, tied to your business requirements and what's going to give you the most bang for your buck. But yeah, I think people jump the gun quickly, and people want to just, again, throw the buzzwords, and this is fancy, this is sexy, but why do you need to throw this IoT sensor over here when I already have a sensor that gives that information? Like, I can serve it up. I'm ready.
Absolutely. Dave, thoughts?
No, I agree. I guess one last question on the data, right? And I feel like lots of times, as groups go into the predictive, as groups go into using AI or ML, or any of these other terms, and I feel like most of the kind of smaller, newer groups, or even larger groups that I talk to, basically anyone that has a network and is collecting data is looking towards, we have to have this. And there are lots of data points that those people are almost certainly not collecting, that they really wish they were collecting and have been collecting for the last 5 to 10 years, in order to go feed into these models that will be built into the future. When you, Alicia, are in the process of looking at, hey, these are the 10 tags, or these are the 100 tags that we need today, how do you go figure out what other tags you also may want to save into a historian or somewhere else, in order to have it for when these other groups are going to need it? Do you have a process? Is it you go through and you're like, I think this one's going to be important? Is it everything? Kind of where do you fall on the we should go save data um, side of the equation?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the old days we had to be careful because we couldn't be collecting so many data points because we had to worry about overhead and, communication, traffic, all of that. I think things have changed a lot. So now we can, VLAN things, we can segregate things, and we can really manage our traffic. And so with that point, I'm more of the tendency to collect as much as I can. Although there's certain things you're not going to collect. So there's certain like internal timers or whatever that you're not going to use for anything. But I want to know when buttons are pushed because I know somebody's going to come to me and say, "Hey, that thing just happened. I didn't touch the button." And then you go like, if you have video, you can watch them hitting the button. But if I have historian, I can prove that. So, some of that is a little bit selfish because I know the controls team we're detectives, right? When something bad happens and we have to figure out what it was. But for me, it's just been through my career, I've kind of seen how the data is used. And I'm very passionate about MES, OEE, CMMS, like those things. I mean, that's the critical stuff for manufacturing. So I have a good sense of what things that I'll need to be able to build out that reporting. I need to know my waste streams. I need to know my throughput. I need to know, rates, what blocked, starved, downtime, all that. So I think about it through the lens of what manufacturing is going to need. So I think it just needs to, and for somebody that maybe hasn't been in manufacturing for a long time, then I think it's important to sit down with the stakeholders of, your maintenance manager, your production supervisor, the people that are going to want to go solve problems, your continuous improvement team, those are the people that are going to have that information. If you don't, haven't done this for 20 years and kind of understand the base level. And of course, I'm going to miss stuff. I'm not saying I get it perfect, but I do have that ingrained in me. I'm a manufacturing person.
I would say, like again, I think if you have a competent team, it should be fairly straightforward to collect nearly all data, right? Like barring mistakes where you at the millisecond level send like analog signals and just crash your network for some reason. The hardware is fairly, I guess, when I say hardware, like servers and hard drives are cheap enough to be able to store data for a very long period of time today. So I completely agree with you. I think if you can store the data, you should definitely be storing it. But again, there is some intelligence put into that. That doesn't mean, you're storing every millisecond of every PLC. Like you need to have some foresight, which I'm assuming the right groups do. So I
Yeah, and
definitely.
I think also you may have your plant floor historian that your people are using to make decisions and solve problems, but there's nothing stopping you from throwing all of that data up read only to the cloud and have a data lake, right? So we
Yeah.
can get the data to where the cool stuff is happening. It doesn't mean it needs to be everything either. So yeah.
Yeah, and again, like I know that those architectures like become complex. I think obviously the three of us will not dissect what that looks like in this conversation. I think there's a lot of thought that needs to go in to do that properly, and I think every site it's going to be slightly probably different depending on the size, the controllers, the protocols, like what they're trying to achieve. But I think again, I agree with what you said, which is that there's tons of opportunities in having that data and not even I think people sometimes want to again like jump the gun and go to the very advanced like AI/ML applications. I think for a lot of facilities it's just understanding their downtime, understanding their asset availability, right? It could be like scheduling their batches, so it doesn't necessarily, at least from my conversations, need to go as far as hiring a data science team to figure out what can be fixed or what is going to break in 3 weeks, right? It could be just the basics in a lot of these scenarios. So
Yeah,
definitely.
just getting away from paper and Excel spreadsheets is a first step for a lot of people. It's pulling those production counts, pulling things off the line, having barcode scanners, all of that stuff. I mean, that's a first step that's going to gain a company a ton. And then you go from there and you figure out
Mhm.
what the next thing is that you need to tackle.
Alicia, I want to ask you, on the visualization, SCADA, and MES layers, right? So you've experienced Wonderware, you've experienced Ignition, you've experienced Factory Talk View, SE, ME, as well as WinCC. So I'm curious, maybe what are your thoughts on sort of that world? Like what makes sense in general, or is there any like also features that you're looking forward on those platforms, and how would you go maybe about selecting one? Maybe not necessarily for the current startup, but in a general sense.
I mean, nowadays, I think the easy answer is Ignition. I've been using Ignition for over 10 years. I'm a fangirl of that as well. And the reason why that is a go-to is because of the cost structure, obviously, but it's the flexibility. So your possibilities are endless. And when I was at Chobani, we had a very large Factory Talk View SC application, and it was using a lot of VBA. We had like 10 redundant data servers. It was a very large application, and it got too large, to the point where we needed to really think about splitting it up. And we were having a lot of issues with our ActiveX and VBA. And there were certain things that we would try to like go to a new version, and then it would just like break everything. Or you'd follow the rules of how many PLCs and how many tags you can have on a data server, and then you'd still get wireframes, for instance. So we were having a bunch of random weird issues from our app just growing so big, and probably some of the custom stuff that was built into it. And we couldn't get help to solve that. And our hands were completely tied. It forced us to be held back on an older version because we couldn't get the appropriate help to solve these problems. And eventually, we kind of figured it out on our own, and we had a plan to move forward to split these things up. But I think the problem with these CAN softwares, and I believe this on MES as well, is nothing. You always need something special. Every company, every factory is different, and you always need to be able to do something special. And it's so challenging to like plan for all of that. And I think a lot of these companies are getting better. I know Aviva Wonderware has done a ton recently, and I haven't touched it in years, but I think they're starting to adopt more of this flexibility, to allow people to do the custom stuff that they need to without having to hire a software developer or whatnot. So to me, it's just making sure you have something that allows you to have the flexibility you need to do whatever you're going to have to do, even the things you haven't even thought of today.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? I don't know the numbers when it comes to maybe the market share, but it is true that I think a lot of those other players are preparing responses. I think Rockwell released their like optics platform. I haven't experienced it on my own, but I've heard that they're pushing it quite extensively at many sites. So again, it's interesting, right? And also, I guess Ignition is releasing new modules, 8.3. So they're also trying to stay ahead of the curve, so to speak. So
Did you ever use Vantage Point in your experience?
no,
So, I mean, that one, I got sold it. I mean, I think we bought just a small portion of it, but
okay,
it was supposed to come in and do dashboarding and metrics and be like a Tableau for manufacturing or whatever. But I mean, it was a pain in the butt to set up. It wasn't straightforward, and it didn't really solve anything. You had to like go in and, I mean, it was a tool set, but it didn't have like amazing training. It wasn't very user friendly. And so it's more than just having the ability, I guess, and it's just how do they feed it to the people that are going to use it. And that's where I think Inductive has done such a good job with Ignition. And I'm pretty sure if I went into Wonderware again, I'm sure I'd enjoy that experience. I enjoy WinCC, and I still love programming in Panel View plus
mhm.
Factory Talk View, MESC. I mean, it's fun.
Did you see? I guess the 8.3 announcement. Any interesting like features or thoughts on that side for
I did
Ignition?
I did see the announcement. I'm really excited about being able to do symbol-based tagging dynamically for the 1200, the Siemens S7 1200. That one's super relevant for me. I actually want to get back to some of the Travis Cox, webinars and things, I want to dig deeper. Right now I'm pretty buried and just trying to build all of my templates and stuff, so not thinking about the future yet.
That's fair. Dave?
Absolutely. No, I think it's interesting. To Alicia's point, I think the inductive automation folks have very much kind of brought on a major revolution of what we've seen in industrial software, especially with the pricing models. And I know that I appreciate that because if it's easier for me to understand, it's easier for all the clients to understand. If I don't need an Excel spreadsheet and like some formula that's buried in the cell in order to tell me what I need in order to go have 10 tags or 10,000 tags as we're going to build this system. For me, I feel like that's been one of the biggest things is they make it easier and straightforward. And then all of the additional benefits that we've seen from there. But I would say, especially within the last probably half a dozen years, I've been really impressed with all of the different groups who have come out with newer technologies. And I think it's just going to force the industry to continue to grow. As I look back, I think of like the Wonderware from the 90s, right? Like Wonderware
Mhm.
from the 90s is like a complete revolution. And then I think with what we've seen with inductive coming out with, especially with 8 and perspective, it's been very much kind of a second or maybe third major revolution at that point. So I'm excited to see where we go. And I'm excited to see if we get some more of that software development side into what we have, I suppose, mostly of this conversation, talking about kind of very much historical, old school hardware. So I am personally very excited to see where that goes. And that brings me to the next question I want to ask you, Alicia, what do you think the automation industry needs on the technology side? Is it an ITOT convergence? Is it more software development practices in PLCs and SCADA? From your perspective, having the opportunity to work with all of these groups in the last handful of years, what do you think the automation industry needs?
Yeah, I think it is the ITOT convergence. It's the software dev controls engineer convergence, and we need to come together and hear each other's side and understand. The problem statement for an OT network is very different than a problem statement for an IT network. And on the software side, I think there's just amazing tools to be unlocked, and Git integrations, rev control, those sort of things. We're still struggling on the automation side with. There's copias getting there, and there's things moving us in that direction. And I think there's a little bit of a belief that controls engineers don't want to do that stuff, but I don't think that's true at all. I think it might be new, but I, we're all very open to it in the people that I've interfaced with. And so I think we have to figure out how to get that education across between software dev and controls to be able to use the tools that make sense. It doesn't mean it's everything. The unit testing topic, we could go on for hours about what that means and what portions of that would add value to us. And I can sit here and be like, well, we've always unit tested. We tried to break that shit whenever we built an AOI, like we did all that. But it's just an education piece, and we've got to figure out how to make the software tools more approachable for controls engineers, because there is a spectrum. There's people that just learned on, I learned on the job, but there's people that just haven't wrote code from scratch, and they're gonna need help. So I think we just need to come together, and that's the future, is being able to utilize these cloud computing things to digital twins, modeling, optimization, things that like Aspen's already doing to some degree, but that's all very specialized. We need to unlock those things and then just be able to have these conversations and let the controls engineers tell you what's really going on the floor, and then the software people can help us add the magic. And hopefully one day we can live in each other's spaces. The software guys can come hang out in my PLC space, and I can go hang out in their coding space in the cloud. So just openness.
Yeah, and I think that's rare, right? Right. Even on the education side, I don't think there's that many, let's say, like software coding best practices type of books for the OT side, right? There's not a shortage of kind of like how to program a PLC, but there's no like, hey, good practices of structuring software, making it scalable. What does that even mean? Why do we care about UDTs? Why do we care about revision control? Right? It's taught in software engineering, But I think a lot of people in the OT side, including like electrical engineers, like they don't really teach that in even in university level, right? So it's a bit of a shame, I suppose, is how I would put it. But
Yeah, and I feel like I had to learn it all kind of on the fly. I just took when when I was at Daisy, I had the guys teaching me, and I built my program how they told me to build it. But I didn't necessarily have the education of really like scanning and how the PLC processes data. There's certain things that I've still never touched. I've come from more of the process control side versus like discrete manufacturing, and I know that things like jumps and I've never had to touch. But so even myself be feeling like I have a really good foundation of controls engineering, don't have all those basics either. So I'm sure it's even worse for, people that haven't had as much exposure.
mhm. Yeah.
Absolutely. I need to shame Vlad because, as Alicia was talking about unit testing, a man named Vladimir Romanov just commented, "quote I test in production." And I want all of our podcast listeners to know that that was a comment that Vlad wrote in the middle of the show. It is a bit of a dig or a deep cut from, I don't know, every 5 episodes of Manufacturing Hub in which Vlad says something to that. Hopefully and mostly in jest. In my mind, Vlad, if that's wrong, please don't correct me. I do hope it is mostly in jest. Alicia, this has been amazing. There are like 27 more hours of topics that we could talk about just in that very last piece. But I do want to go ask you the last questions we ask all of our guests. And the first one, as I have forewarned you, is one of my favorites. So I want to go and be very open when I ask you to go predict the future. What do you think the future of industrial automation looks like? Anything from companies that are going to be the most successful to hardware to software to a way we're going to manage all of these convergences in the future. I leave the floor open to you for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we touched on this. To me, the future is all of us coming together, speaking the same language, stop shaming each other, stop acting like one person's better than the other, and we figure out how to best utilize all of the tools and what does that future architecture look like. And then it's just perfect harmony. And then we've got automatic PMs being sent to our CMMS because we have this cool predictive thing in the cloud that a software guy or gal built. And we're just taking advantage of all the things that are out there. It's less of this fighting who's right, who's wrong. We're using all of it. It's all pieces of this architecture that needs to happen. And I think we're moving in the right direction with OT, IT. The software
Mhm.
stuff is more new, so we're a little bit behind the curve, but we're getting there. And that is my optimistic view of the future.
Absolutely. I appreciate the optimism. Last month was ICS Cybersecurity Month. We had Jason on from Inductive last week. He's the CISO at Inductive Automation, and they always have the worst, most horrific predict the future. So I appreciate the optimism, Alicia. I absolutely needed that after going back and reading and listening to our previous cybersecurity experts of what is the future. So thank you so much for that.
I'm
Next question.
trying.
Yeah, thank you. So next question I'd like to ask you is for some career advice. So typically we ask for someone like early to mid-career. We're open to your best career advice as to if it's, pieces of technology people should focus on, as to if it's positions they should go look for. What is the career advice you either would give someone or perhaps give one of the many people that you've hired?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to find a mentor in
Hmm.
the area that you want to go into. So, let's say you're a maintenance technician and you really want to do controls. You need to, even if it's not somebody at your company, LinkedIn is a beautiful place. I have
Hmm.
people ask me to mentor them often, and I have to limit how many people because I only have so much time. But reach out, and then beyond mentorship, you have to go learn yourself. So, Automation Direct, you can download free softwares. The Code Assist, there's a lot of tools now where you can actually get free softwares. There's tons of YouTube videos. There's Frank Lamb's Automation Academy that is a great tool. There's so many ways to learn.
Hmm.
So I need people to not say, well, I needed the opportunity. I can't get into controls unless you give me the opportunity. you can go proactively learn this stuff. And then the minute you say, I have learned PLC stuff, and you have that on your resume, people are going to look at you. So
Mhm.
you got to put the effort in and then seek that help to help you grow.
Absolutely. I love that. Johnny is in the comments saying that we can't even agree on the naming and tagging components. And I 100% and very sadly agree with that. In fact, Vlad and I can't even agree on where and if you should go do that. So I appreciate I appreciate that, and thank you so much for the career advice, Alicia. I agree. Going and finding a mentor exceptionally important, and I find that good large organizations have some sort of formal and or semi-formal mentorship structures in order to go bring in kind of early to mid-career people in order to help them be more successful. So thank you so much for that. Next question is, I know you have a book recommendation for us, and I'm interested to hear about it. So what do you have for us today?
Yeah, so Reboot,
Mhm.
Leadership and the Art of Growing Up by Jerry Kalana. I don't know exactly how to pronounce his name. So this one is very much from, I've only started reading it, I'm about halfway through, but it feels very similar to what I try to do, which is lead with empathy, lead with
Mhm.
integrity. It's more than just barking orders and results. You have to figure out how to like motivate your people and look inside, like figure out who you are, what you like, what makes you tick, and be like the best person that you can be. And you can't go help other people and be strong for other people if you don't be strong for yourself. And I'm coming off of a pretty crazy 4 years, to be very honest, where I was
Mhm.
working way too much. And so I'm on
Mhm.
this journey of figuring out who I am. What do I like outside of work? You know, even professionally, what do I really like, and
Mhm.
what are my next steps going to be? So I think it's just really important to have that self-reflection and be able to admit when you're wrong, and be humble, all of those things. So working on figuring out how to manage up. So hopefully some of these higher ups take my book recommendation and read it. Maybe that'll help.
I love it, and I would completely agree. I feel like lots of times it's very easy to get into the same role and go work your 40 or 60 or 80 hours every week, and then at some point you look up and years have gone by, and you maybe might not be in the place that you had hoped to have been 4 years ago because you don't have that time, or you don't take that time for self-reflection, or you don't take that time to do things outside of work and remember all of that. So awesome book recommendation. I will go pick that up, and Vlad and I will go talk about it at length, maybe on the show at some point in the future, because I think it's a super important topic. There, if you guys are listening and or watching, Vlad has dropped all of the show note has dropped the link to that book in the show notes. And then the last question for you, Alicia, is how can our listeners help? Who should reach out and connect? Are you looking to talk about technology? Are you guys looking to hire? How can our listeners help you?
Yeah, so look me up on LinkedIn. I've become more active. That's a part of my recovery from being in a hole. I really enjoy talking about automation, these topics, the ones that can get contentious at times even. I think it's
Mhm.
really important, and I think the automation community on LinkedIn is great, and we're tight knit, and there's a lot of people that can help. So anywhere I can help, if it's a topic of like, I'm going to go look for an MES. What are the important factors? Or,
Mhm.
talk to me about spare parts program, whatever that looks like. I just love talking about all this stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely,
And I will
Alicia. Thank
say,
you. Go ahead,
I was
Vlad.
gonna say, if you're listening to this in podcast form, the link to Alicia's profile as well as the book will be in the show notes.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vlad. Thank you, Alicia. This has been an awesome conversation. Alicia, I'm super happy that we got you out of your hole and you've been able to come on and have a conversation with us. I look forward to doing it again before episode 400 at this point. And so that has been awesome. If you guys have followed along, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for coming and hanging out with us, especially the folks who have commented or sent me messages. I've got like 4 of them since you guys saw us go live. So awesome. Everyone, thank you so much much for that. If you have made it this far, make sure to give us a thumbs up. Make sure to follow Alicia and Manufacturing Hub, as well as Vlad and myself. If you guys have made it to podcast form, you're absolutely amazing. Please give us the rate us the 5 stars and follow along and subscribe. And Vlad laughs, Alicia, but I remember to say this, and Vlad pushes the podcast on the same day every week. And we have more people who listen to us and more people who find us, which is pretty cool. Awesome. But thank you, everyone else. Thank you, everyone, so much. We'll see